Tonight, you do not need to try to find peace. Just sit still. Take a deep breath and let your own breathing become the path that leads you back to stillness. Every sound out there, the wind, the distant hum of traffic, the heartbeat of the city, will eventually fade away. And what remains is simply you and this breath in this very moment. If today has felt too long, if your mind is still tangled in thoughts that have not yet been sorted out, then let me share with you a few Zen stories. Short tales, gentle enough to calm the waves stirring inside your heart. These stories are not about lofty philosophies or rigid teachings. They are just an invitation to follow along through the breath, through the candlelight, through teachings that are ancient yet fresh as the morning dew. Each story is like a breath. Each word spoken is a drop of stillness falling onto the surface of your mind. There is no need to memorize, no need to understand, and no need to search for meaning. Just listen, the same way you would listen to rain tapping gently on a tiled roof, or feel the breeze brush past your shoulder without trying to hold on to it. If this place brings you even a small sense of calm, if this voice makes your eyes gently close, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way, every time night falls and the world quiets down, I can share with you another story about peace, about breath, and about you. Now take another deep breath. Exhale slowly. Feel the warmth in your chest melt quietly into stillness. Let tonight be the place you return to, the place where you do not need to strive, the place where everything is already enough. And when you are ready, we will step into the very first Zen stories that will bring you deep peace and a truly restful sleep. The evening at the temple on the hill arrived in a very slow light. On the pine canopy, the wind shifted its direction like a traveler tiptoeing through unfamiliar land. The stone steps leading up to the main hall were still warm from the afternoon sun, but when you sat down, the stone passed a very slight coolness into your skin, as though time were laying a thin layer of mist over everything. In that place, right before the temple threshold, there hung a lantern lowered. Its golden glow did not banish all of the darkness. It only drew a small ring of light, enough to make out the grain of the wood on the half-closed door, and the yellow pollen still clinging to the night-blooming jasmine at its base. The temple's bell-keeper was an old monk. Everyone called him Master Trung, not because he was stern, but because his eyes were always clear, as though everything that passed by could be quietly reflected in them. This year he spoke less than in years past. Every evening, after burning a short incense stick and striking the bell 3 times, He would sit on the stone step and look toward the misty bridge down in the valley. That bridge connected two fields, its wooden planks. On cold nights, when the mist lay thick, the bridge seemed half submerged in a white river flowing gently through the earth. Tonight, as soon as the bell's sound faded, a young woman stood hesitating outside the temple gate. She wore an old coat, a small cloth bag in her hand. She did not enter, only stood there like a shadow shaped as a person. Master Trung saw her tilted his head a little, but did not call out. He seldom waved to those who were hesitant because he knew some thresholds can only be crossed when one tells oneself the time has come. Finally, the young woman stepped in. The lantern's light brushed her face with a thin, golden layer, revealing eyes still moist with tears. She bowed, her voice husky. "May I sit here for a little while?" "Master." The master nodded and offered her a place on the stone step, then remained silent. The two of them sat in that way, saying nothing. From afar, the bark of a dog echoed across the fields. Nearby, the pine leaves brushed one another faintly, like the sound of silk robes. After a while, the woman spoke. "I have not been able to sleep for many nights. Every time I close my eyes, the same image reappears in my mind. A bridge, faint in the mist, and a person walking toward me, then disappearing just before reaching me. I am afraid to close my eyes. I am even afraid of the moments of silence." The master did not ask why that bridge existed or who that person was. He simply asked, "When that person disappeared, where were you?" The young woman was silent. She did not know. She only saw the void widening, a feeling of stumbling, as if she had misstepped. She said, "I ran after them. I forgot where I was. Then I opened my eyes, and everything crashed back in, as though no dream had existed at all, leaving only exhaustion." The master stood up, walked slowly inside, then returned with a ceramic cup. He poured warm water and placed it in her hands. "Drink. Then, would you like to walk down into the valley?" "Right now?" she asked, surprised. Now she said, "Yes, now," he replied. She hesitated for a few seconds, then nodded. The path down to the valley passed through a grove of old bamboo. At each turn, the cricket's song paused for a beat, as if greeting them. Mist collected on the edge of the grass, touching the hem of her trousers, and lingering. No one spoke. When they arrived at the head of the bridge, the young woman stopped. It indeed was the same bridge from her dream. Old bamboo railings, damp wooden planks, mist so thick that even the stars seemed to be sinking into it. She clutched the sleeve of her coat. The master said, "A bridge is only a bridge. Mist is only mist. But the steps are yours." They stepped onto it. The wooden planks yielded slightly, letting out a tiny sound like the long breath of something old. With each step, the mist parted, then closed behind them, leaving a faint path. Midway across the bridge, the master paused. "Listen," he said. The young woman thought he meant listen to crickets or flowing water, but he did not. He closed his eyes. After a few seconds, she did too. At first, there were only familiar sounds, wind leaves, heartbeat. Then, beneath all those sounds, she recognized something else, the sound of her own footsteps. They could not be mistaken. Each step had its own weight, its own rhythm, its own life. "Can you hear it?" asked the master. The young woman softly answered, "I can hear it." "Good. Then you know that in your dream there was a person walking toward you and vanishing. But you never noticed at that moment whose rhythm your footstep followed." She opened her eyes. The mist had thinned a little. On the railing, drops of water had gathered into round beads. She said, "Maybe I was walking to the rhythm of the other person." The master nodded. "That is why you felt weary, because you stopped listening to your own rhythm." They stood on the bridge just a little while longer. The master said, "Let us do a simple thing. From here to the end of the bridge, walk slowly. Count one breath each step. When you inhale, you step. When you exhale, you pause half a beat. If you become lost, do not blame yourself. Just return to the footstep." And so on. She nodded. They walked. 1, 2, 3. Each step placed a breath down. Each pause became a small quiet. She felt her feet touch the damp board, pass up through her calves, then dissolve into her hips. The rustle of the day's many voices receded, as though someone gently turned down a very fine, invisible dial on the wall. When she reached the end of the bridge, she turned around. The path behind her seemed longer than when she came. The mist was no longer thick. The water in the small canal beneath the bridge appeared black and smooth, like a sheet of fabric. And on it, the moonlight spread a beam of brightness. She exhaled. "I no longer see the person in my dream." The teacher smiled. That person was never crossing the bridge to come to you. That person is the part of you that is trying to return to your own rhythm of footsteps. They sat on a large rock by the field's edge. The teacher asked, "What is your name?" She replied, "My name is Yen." The teacher could not hide a slight nod of a smile. Beautiful name. But the most beautiful is when a name becomes experience. Yen was silent, her hand slowly laying upon her lap. At some point, she did not know when the sound of crickets had grown steadier. The blades of grass bowed toward one another in the night's shadow. Yen said she had left the city a week ago. The night shifts at the hospital had exhausted her, and a sad event suddenly drew her into a void. A friend closest to her had left without a word. On her desk remained a note scribbled, "Do not search anymore." From that day, the dream of the bridge began. Each time she closed her eyes, she would see a figure blurred in the mist, stepping forward, coming very near, then vanishing. She awoke with a sensation of being abandoned just before touching the most important thing in her life. The teacher listened. He did not utter comforting words, soft as a pillow. He only said, "You have gone to a place where what you thought was yours no longer stays still, so you can name it." That is when one realizes the rhythm one has been living by was not chosen by oneself. He picked up a small stone and dropped it into the canal. The ripples spread, hit the grass bank, dissolved into the night's darkness. What you thought was loss is sometimes simply the step of another having left your rhythm. Yen asked, "If I no longer want to chase anymore, what should I do with this emptiness?" The teacher answered, "Place one foot down, then another step. The emptiness does not need to be filled. It needs to be walked through." She was silent, looking at the water, then took a deep breath. Something warmed beneath her sternum. Not exactly hope, not exactly sorrow, just the feeling of something suddenly no longer wanting to run. They returned to the temple by the same path. At the bamboo thicket, the wind changed the mist, thinned the lantern light, before the gate appeared like a gentle eye. Before stepping on the threshold, Yen paused. "Teacher, can you teach me how to sleep again?" The teacher looked into her eyes. Sleeping is not forcing. Sleeping is letting go. Letting go is not throwing away, but placing down in the right place. Tonight, you will sleep on the wooden platform in the guest room. I will give you a small exercise, the mist bridge exercise. In the temple's guest room, there was a simple wooden platform, a thin blanket, and a window looking into the backyard, where there was a low cluster of bamboo. The teacher placed a small oil lamp in the corner. He said, "When you lie down, place your right hand on your lower belly, left hand on your chest, eyes closed, but not forced. Inhale and count 1 exhale and count 2. Count up to 4, then return to 1. Each number you place your foot on is a plank of the bridge. Do not rush across to the other side. Each number is a step you place down sufficient. Yen lay down, heard the wooden platform exhale a faint creak. The teacher sat on the wooden chair, said nothing. At first, everything returned as before. Images like mist, like the figure, like a hand not yet grasped, like a name unsaid. But this time, amid those things, there were 4 numbers slowly placed down. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then 1, 2, 3, 4. Each time she strayed, she returned. Each time she returned, she did not blame. After a while, the numbers were no longer numbers. They became soft tissue rhythms under her hand. At the 4th beat, she felt her body a little heavier, but it was a gentle weight, as though water had decided to embrace the leaf instead of push it. The teacher watched her, saw her shoulders lower a bit, her jaw soften. He stood, extinguished the lamp's wick. The light withdrew, leaving a pleasant darkness. He stepped outside, sat on a stone step, hearing the night's sound, like water flowing into the deepest cave. Inside, Yan went through fewer and fewer numbers. Eventually, she no longer counted. There remained only the warmth beneath her hand and the sound of her breathing returning. The mist bridge appeared once more, but there was no person walking toward her. There was only herself standing at the bridge's head. She placed 1 foot on the damp plank. A faint trail parted, then closed behind her. In the middle of the bridge, she stopped, turned her face into the mist, did not call anyone. She exhaled. The mist drifted aside, enough for her to see the far bank. There was nothing special on that bank, just a dry piece of land and a small bamboo tree. The next morning, before the first bell's sound had even dissipated, Yan already sat up. The first thing she realized was not how many hours she had slept, but that her throat no longer carried the metallic taste of a night with eyes open. In the yard, the early sun laid a band of gold on the stone step. The teacher was there, holding a teapot. Yan greeted him. The teacher asked, "Where did you get to last night?" She smiled. "I stood in the middle of the bridge. I did not need anyone to walk toward me." The teacher nodded. "That is enough for the first night." In the following days, Yen remained at the temple. During the day, she helped sweep the yard water, the plants dry the old mats. In the afternoon, the teacher taught her to close her eyes and listen to the broom sweeping from the front of the yard to the back, as if hearing a wordless scripture. In the evening, they returned to the bridge. Some nights, Yan walked very fast. The mist had not yet closed. The teacher said, "Fast does not mean arriving early. Fast means drifting away from your own step." The next day, she walked too slowly, each rhythm heavy as dragging stones. The teacher said, "Slow does not mean pausing to erect a monument for a step. Slow means placing down correctly and then leaving." Once it rained. The bridge was wet, the mist thick. The canal water rose to touch the underside of the board. Yan felt afraid. The teacher said, "There are days when the bridge belongs to the water. In those times, do not walk. Stand and listen." They stood under the rain, heard the water go through the board, through the bamboo handrail, through the grass bank, like hearing an ancient crowd speaking in a forgotten language. Yan realized there were nights when sleep arrived, not because one had walked the entire bridge, but because one knew where to stop. By the second week, Yan said the dream of the other person returned, but differently. The person came closer. When only one step remained to touch, the person stopped and smiled. The smile neither invited nor refused. It was only as though returning to her the borrowed rhythm of footsteps. Then the person turned away, walked past her, as though walking through a layer of mist. Yan did not chase. She stood there, listening to the sound of her own footsteps, then took a very small step downward. The teacher listened, then said, "When another turns their back, we often think they have left us, but many times they only left the mirror that we unintentionally became." He poured tea. "Some people leave, and we are at peace, not because we forget them, but because we remember ourselves." Yan was silent for a long time. She looked at the warm droplets gathering on the surface of the teacup saw in them, the reflection of herself distorted, then returned to roundness in time with each breath. One morning, Yan said it was time to return. The teacher did not try to stop her. He handed her a thin piece of dried jute string. "When you remember the mist bridge, hold this string. Gently pull one end. If it feels too tight, loosen it. If it feels too slack, give it a little tug. Your steps are the same." She held the string and smiled. "I am afraid that there will be times when I forget the rhythm again." The teacher nodded. "There will be. And that is not failure. That is a sign that you are alive. Every time you forget, just count 4 sta again. 4 is enough for a small bridge. On the path leaving the temple, Passing the bamboo thicket, Yen paused. The morning breeze carried the scent of damp earth and old incense, light as a film of smoke across the water's surface. She turned, bowed deeply. The teacher stood on the stone steps, raising a hand, as if placing something into the space between them. Not a blessing, not advice, just a silence long enough for someone to hear the sound of their own footsteps beginning again. The city welcomed Yen with honking horns and sharp traffic lights. She returned to her cramped room, the wooden desk with old water stains, the bed by the window, where wind slipped through thin curtains. That first night, she lay down, placed her hands, as she had learned, and counted to 4. At number 3, an old text message flashed across her memory, the words, "Do not search anymore." Instead of resisting, she smiled slightly, placed it at number 4, and returned to 1. The message fell away like an autumn leaf. No need to pick it up. At number 2, she was asleep. In the months that followed, she went back to work. Some nights, there were too many patients. The shifts too long. Her eyes stung under the white hospital lights. Every time she left the hospital and reached the intersection, she would take out the jute string in her pocket and gently pull. If it was tight, she let go. If it was loose, she lifted it a little. The road home suddenly had an invisible bridge stretched between 2 sidewalks, and her footsteps echoed just right. Some nights, she was too tired to count, but the habit of placing her steps and then letting go remained. Sleep came like a friend who knew the way. One night, she dreamed of walking on a completely different bridge, a stone bridge. No mist, clear blue sky above. The one who had left stood at the far end, not waving, not turning away, just standing like a tree rooted at the edge. Yen took one step, then another, then stopped in the middle. She bowed from a distance. The other person bowed too. No one approached. No one left. In that bow, she heard a faint sound, like damp wood sighing when touched by a foot. It was the sound of a rhythm finally aligned. Several years later, Yen returned to the temple. Teacher Trung was frailer now. The stone steps were still warm, the lantern still hung, but part of the mist bridge's railing had been replaced. They sat down, just like the old days. Yen told him about the city, about long nights and very short mornings, about the jute string, now frayed at both ends, about letters never sent, and goodbyes she had finally spoken. The teacher did not ask who that person was. It no longer mattered. He only asked, "Do you still count to 4?" Yen smiled. "I do, but sometimes I forget to count." The teacher nodded. "Good. Forgetting to count means you remember the step. On her last night at the temple, Yan walked down to the bridge alone. The mist was light, the moon was full. She placed one foot down. She no longer needed to listen carefully to know whose step it was. Her footsteps sounded like a key unlocking a very old door. But that door did not lead to anywhere new. It simply opened a room that had always existed inside her, a room with a bell, a window frame, and a breath moving in and out slowly. Standing in the middle of the bridge, she turned toward the valley, closed her eyes, and smiled. A number just barely surfaced, then disappeared, like the last star before dawn. The next morning, the temple bell rang out. Yan left the temple. On her shoulder was a small cloth bag, inside it, the faded jute string. On the stone step, the teacher stood, his eyes still as clear as ever. They said nothing, because everything that needed to be said was already in the sound of her footsteps as she passed through the gate. On the path down the valley, the mist thinned. The bridge behind her could no longer be seen, but Yan knew it was still there, like a lesson that no longer needed repeating. In the life that followed, whenever the night returned with too much noise, Yan only needed one small gesture, placing one hand on her lower belly, the other on her chest, breathing and counting to 4. At number 4, she always remembered the mist bridge. And each time, there was a person who did not need to arrive, did not need to leave, still smiling gently on the far bank, just so her own rhythm could find its way back to itself. In those moments, sleep came, not like a soft daze, but like a friend who sat beside her in silence, knowing that everything was now enough. And that was how she relearned something that seemed so small, yet quietly changed the course of a life. To cross a bridge, do not look into the mist. Do not stare at the far side. Just listen to the sound of your own footsteps. Once you can hear them, no bridge is too long, no night too cold, and no farewell strong enough to pull you out of rhythm. All that remains are beautiful layers of mist along a road you already know, the story. The water dock behind the garden. In the afternoon, in the small town, the day often ends with the smell of kitchen smoke and the scent of young rice lingering around the narrow alleys. The path leading to Mrs. High's house winds past a thick row of hibiscus, their red flowers hanging like little lanterns on the leafy wall. At the end of the hibiscus row is a brick courtyard spotted with moss. Beside it, a small water dock behind the garden, its stone embankment darkened with age. The water is so clear, you can count the grains of sand lying quietly at the bottom. On the water's surface, the banana leaves hang down in long streaks. Occasionally, a lizard falls and drops a bead of water, which ripples. Once then the wave touches the grass bank and disappears as if it had never been there. There, each afternoon, Mrs. High would sit and wash a few old handkerchiefs, laying them out on a clothesline strung askew between two areca palm trunks, then pour a cup of tea and sit watching the water become still after the ripple. On that day, she was sitting like that when someone knocked on the gate. The knock was unhurried, steady, like the knock of someone who has walked a long road but still remembers to bow at the strange gate. Mrs. High stood, walked across the porch, opened the door. In front of her was a lanky young man, his backpack weather-faded, his eyes deep but not dark. He bowed and said, "I am Kai." I phoned ahead. Mrs. High smiled, stepped back to give him way. "Come in, child. The road is long. You must be thirsty. Come to the back garden. It is cooler." They went out to the water dock. Kai set his backpack down on a stone step and sat at a respectful distance from her. Mrs. High poured tea and handed him the cup. Kai took it, cradling it with both hands like a small bird. The warmth of the tea seeped into his skin, gradually soothing a nameless tremor. Since leaving the hospital, he avoided closed rooms, the sound of machines, even the smell of antiseptic. His closest friend had stayed behind in one rainy afternoon, and ever since, a sound like metal scraping against metal, small but unceasing, had appeared in his head. At night, when he lay down, the sound would slice inside him, making his heart skip a beat, then race as though one were crossing a thin plank bridge, and suddenly forgot how to keep balance. Mrs. High did not ask anything. She had learned not to ask long ago, since the years when she was young, and saw a neighborhood child crying by the paddy bank. Some things can only be heard in silence. She slowly said, "Here at night, it is calm." But that is not because there are no sounds. It is because the sounds move slowly. You will sleep in the outer bedroom, the window facing the water dock. Each evening, go out there a while, sit until you hear a different sound besides the one in your head. Kai did not understand, but he nodded. She gave him a faded handkerchief and said, "In the evening, go out to the dock. Remember to bring this." Kai took the handkerchief, imagining some ritual. But that evening, nothing happened as he thought. There was only the cool path, the smell of earth after the watering, the solitary croak of a toad somewhere among the banana clumps, and the water's surface wrinkling slightly under the wind. He sat down on the stone step, placed the handkerchief on the palm of his left hand. His other hand rested on his knee. The metallic sound inside his head still hissed. This time he tried counting to see if it had a cycle. It seemed not. It was a rope pulley with the wrong rhythm, a wheel slipping off its groove. He sighed. Mrs. High sat on a higher step, silent, like a warm rock. Try listening to the sound of water. Walking, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Kai closed his eyes. At first, he heard only the sound inside his head, but very slowly, as though someone opened a distant door, the sound of water dripping from a vent, the sound of a drop falling through a banana leaf, the sound of a frog in the reed bed, emerged bit by bit. Among those sounds, there was another, the sound of his own breathing as his hand touched the handkerchief. That breathing was irregular, like someone carrying a heavy load up a slope. He exhaled longer. Then a beat held an empty pause, then inhaled and felt the hiss inside his head slow to half speed. She said, "Each evening, you dip this handkerchief into the water, wring it out very slowly, then place it in your palm. The water from the handkerchief will go through your hand, past your wrist, into your elbow, and then your chest will know the rhythm of the water. At that moment, the sound in your head will have to learn a new rhythm in order to stay." Kai smiled lightly. "Learn a new rhythm." "Yes, just like the way I taught the children to spell. The letters look the same, but one time they are at the beginning, another time at the end. The sound changes, the meaning changes." He dipped the handkerchief into the water. The water was cool like a long sigh. He wrung it out very slowly. The sound of water falling onto the dock cracked clearly. You could count each drop. He placed the handkerchief in his hand. The chill from the cloth went into the skin through thin layers to the spot where the hissing sound lived, and the sound felt like someone had placed their hand on its head, calming it a little. That night, Kai slept. Not in one continuous stretch, but each time he woke, he only needed to place his hand on the handkerchief, remember the water passing through him, and the sleep returned like a light blanket. The next morning, he got up early, went to the dock, sat watching the first rays of sunlight touch the moss streaks on the stone steps. Mrs. High brought him a bowl of thin porridge and a boiled egg, saying, "Eat just a little. If you eat too much, your stomach is heavy, and at night you'll remember too much." Kai ate his mouth warm, his belly warm, and his head cool. He asked her about the water dock. She told him that it had been there since her mother's time. Back then, The water was very clear, and every morning a few people would draw water, wash their faces, drop some grains of rice for the little fish. She no longer saw anyone drop rice, but every afternoon she still sprinkled a handful of fine salt. This habit no one explained, just that it made the water less smelly from algae. Then she told him about her husband, the man who walked off to the other side of a road one summer noon, leaving the smell of sweat on his shirt and a newly trimmed bougainvillea pot. He walked lightly as someone going to the water dock bent to wash his face, looked up and saw a different sky. In the following days, Kai lived by Mrs. Hai's rhythm. Morning sweeping the yard, lunchtime a short nap, afternoon weeding under the banana trees, evening out to the water dock with the handkerchief. Every evening, he dipped the cloth, wrung it out, placed it in his hand, listened to the water move. Some nights, he heard extra things, the two sparrows squabbling on the roof, someone's sandals dragging outside the alley, the distant train like a fine line vibrating in the ground air. These sounds made the hiss in his head no longer stand in the room by itself. It slipped back into a corner, like a child who knows how to stand still when the grown-ups pass. Sometimes he sat long enough to see the water change color 3 times under the rising moon. Mrs. Hai sometimes did not come out to the dock. She left him there alone because she knew there are lessons where one person stays and one person leaves. When his shadow grew long on the stone step, she would bring him a cup of warm water, stand behind him, and say, "Drink, then go to sleep. Let the outside water meet the inside water." One afternoon, after the rain, the quay was full of fallen leaves. Kai was about to sweep them, but his grandmother told him to leave them. Sometimes, a quay does not need to be clean. It needs to remember the wind was here. They sat quietly, watching the leaves drift slowly. Suddenly, Kai asked Grandma if I remember old things. What should I do? She did not look at him. She looked at the water's surface where a banana leaf had just floated to the shore, caught under a small pebble, then stopped. If you remember, just remember. But remember, as you remember the path you walk, not as you dig a wound open. When you remember, dip the cloth, wring it slowly, place it on your hand. Let the water do the work of the water. Kai was silent. He closed his eyes and saw himself standing in the hospital corridor, the smell of medicine mixed with rain, the plastic shoes squelching on the tile floor. His close friend lay motionless, the white oxygen tube in place, eyes closed. He called his name. his voice like wind blown out before it reached its end. Now, when that memory came back, he no longer pushed it away. He dipped a cloth, wrung it very slowly, heard the water falling like a string of evenly spaced beads on a ceramic dish. He placed the cloth on his hand, felt the memory seep down like a drop of water, finding its way through soil. That night, Kai dreamed. He stood at the quay, but the water did not reflect his face. It reflected a window opening onto a blue sky where a kite had slipped from someone's hand and was trying to land on a rooftop. He heard his friend's laughter behind him, a laugh unlike the one in the hospital, but like a laugh in an afternoon on the schoolyard when he and his friend played tag under the row of flamboyant trees. He turned, saw no one. The laugh neither receded nor came closer. It held still. He bent down, dipped his hand into the water. The water was cool. The laughter blurred, then suddenly became the sound of wind brushing through banana leaves. He knew that dream had not come so that he would stay, but to return to him, a sound that had been crossed out by whistling too long. The next morning, Kai told his grandmother about the dream. She just smiled. Any sound silenced for too long becomes a snapped string on a musical instrument. If you tie it again, the instrument will sing. Tying is not to make it the same, but so it can still sing. Then she handed Kai a thin sisal cord, taught him to tie a knot she called the kui knot, 2 loops embracing each other. 1 loop holds 1 loop, breathes. Whenever you feel the sound in your head is about to burst, tie a knot. Not to tie the sound, but to tie your hand to what you are doing. In the days that followed, Kai tied many knots, tied the bag of vegetable seeds, tied the flimsy clothesline string, tied the thread on his grandmother's old shirt. Each time he finished tying, he touched the knot, as if touching a punctuation mark placed in the right place. And suddenly, the sentence could be read. One twilight, the man in the neighborhood carrying 2 buckets of water passed by, stopped to ask his grandmother, "Has the boy been sleeping better lately?" She nodded. "The water has taught him." The man smiled, reminded Kai, "Water is good. It hides nothing. It only lets everything see itself." That phrase followed Kai into the night. He sat longer at the quay, trying to see what the water had shown. He saw his face no longer rigid at the forehead, as in the early nights. He saw his shoulders drop, not held up, like waiting for an order. He saw his hand still holding the cloth, not to chase something away, but to hold something back. To hold not the past, but the rhythm. One morning, Kai told his grandmother that he wanted to go, not because he had cleansed his memories, but because he wanted to carry the key with him. She understood. She went into the house, rummaged in the small wooden chest, took out a ceramic bowl, cracked so finely around the rim, like a hairline. "I have kept this since young. It cracked many years ago. I did not throw it away because it still holds water. You carry it with you. When you pour water into it, you look at that crack. Remember that what was once fractured can still hold full. But remember not to fill it too much. Full means overflowing." Kai took the bowl, felt his hand warm from a warmth unrelated to tea. He bowed his head in thanks. She did not say, "Go in peace." She just said, "When you are thirsty, remember to dip the cloth." Kai left the town on a mildly sunny day. He passed a row of hibiscus red flowers, brushing his sleeve like little waves of greeting. Leaving the neighborhood, he looked back, saw his grandmother's low straw-thatched roof house, behind it, the banana trees stirring. He suddenly thought of the road he would go, the nights in the city, the coarse lights, the horn blasts, and knew that the whistling in his head had not vanished entirely. But he no longer felt afraid. He knew how to turn down an invisible knob. He knew how to place a wet cloth on his hand. He knew how to tie a knot. Back at his room, Kai placed the cracked bowl on the shelf by the window. That night, he turned off the light, opened the door, let the wind push the thin curtain, as if someone blew off dust with a soft breath. He took the cloth to the wash basin, dipped wrung, placed it on his hand. The sound in his head returned, but stood a little distance away from him. He did not chase it. He did not call it. He heard the water running in the pipe, the neighbor dragging a chair, a cat jumping down a tin roof, and among those sounds, he heard a breath stir in his throat. He slowed his breathing, let the exhale linger, longer than the half-beat whistling. For the first time in many months, he slept straight through without dreaming. Time passed. Kai worked in a small library. In the mornings, he opened the door. The newspaper delivery smelled of fresh ink. He shelved books, each volume placed as though placing a brick. He enjoyed the quiet hours, the turn of a page sounding like water turning its reflection. One day, he suddenly paused, remembering the hospital. He stood still, letting the memory pass through him like another gust of wind. He took the cloth out of his pocket, went to the washroom, dipped it, wrung, pressed it on his wrist. 15 breaths. The whistling tone faded away like distant rain changing direction. One late autumn afternoon, he received a parcel addressed with no sender's name. Inside was a photo of the Kui. The water's surface reflected clouds. A piece of the stone step fractured a handkerchief hanging on the clothesline. On the back of the photo was a line of writing: "When you are weary, remember to sit. When you are thirsty, remember to dip." The handwriting looked older. Generation. Surely his grandmother had asked someone to write it. He placed the photo in a frame next to the cracked bowl. That night, he did not need the cloth. He just sat, watched the street light draw a thin yellow streak on the wall, and sensed in his chest a small quay, newly dug, the water still, but not dead cool, but not cold. A few years later, Kai met a woman at the library. She came looking for books about rivers. They talked, then walked, then shared comfortable silences. One evening, he brought her back to his room and showed her the cracked bowl. She picked it up, turned it in her hands, smiled. "It is beautiful because of the crack, not in spite of it." That sentence settled in the room like a new pillow placed at the head of the bed. Each of them carried a handkerchief. Some nights, they dipped together, wrung together, placed on their hands, sat quietly, watched the streak of light drift over the wall. Other nights, they did not need a cloth. They needed a knot to tie the conversation back together after a moment of misunderstanding. Each knot tied, they touched. It heard a sentence, just readable. There were hard seasons. Work was tight. Money was little loss kept its secrets. The whistling in his head occasionally returned, like an old guest trying to see if he still had a place. Kai did not chase it away. He invited it to sit on the chair by the window, handed it a glass of water in the cracked bowl, then went about his work. When he thought of his friend who had gone, he did not force himself to remember or to forget. He went to the wash basin, let the water run, dipped, a cloth wrung slowly, placed it on his hand, heard the water find its path. Water always finds a way, and memory too. It does not stay to gouge. It goes to moisten, to soften, a place that once hardened. One early winter day, Kai returned to the town. Mrs. Hai was no longer sitting by the waterside. The house was empty. The old mossy bank, a section of the clothesline, snapped. Neighbors told him she had gone along with her husband, as light as a person, tilting her shoulder through a door. The waterside still lay quiet, only the water's surface heavier, because the sky was low. Kai sat down on the stone step. He took out a cloth, dipped it, wrung it, laid it on his hand. the sound of the falling water was still clear. He remembered her voice. Drink it, and then go to sleep. Let the water out there meet the water in here. He did not cry. He sat for a long time until the wind flipped the surface of the water one more time, and a few banana leaves floated over from somewhere and landed by the broken step. He looked at the water side and understood that places that know how to sit quietly will never disappear. They just change the person who sits. When leaving the town, Kai carried a small stone from the bank. He placed it on his table next to the cracked bowl and the photograph. Occasionally, he touched the stone, feeling time quiet beneath his skin. He told the woman about Mrs. High, about the sound of the water, about the cloth, about the notch by the waterside. She listened and said, "Behind my house, there is also a little pool. Let's build a waterside with our eyes." They placed a terracotta pot on the corner of the balcony, dropped in a few pebbles, a sprig of moss. Each evening, after watering the plants, they dipped. The cloth wrung it, laid it on, a hand sat, until they heard the water run through the small grooves and their voices turn soft. Long afterwards, one night, the whistling inside Kai's head rose sharply like a gale. He was in a hospital, visiting an acquaintance. The smell of old medicine rushed out. The lights were harsh, the sound of shoes and machines all hooked together into a bright chain. He walked out into the corridor, found a window, opened it. There was no waterside, no cloth, only two empty hands. He placed one hand on the other wrist, imagined a wet cloth lying there. He inhaled slowly, exhaled long, counted imaginary drops falling from the cloth's edge. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The whistle did not end immediately, but it retreated, like someone giving way for a heavy-carrying person to pass. He stood another 2 minutes, then returned to the room, sat beside his acquaintance like a small piece of wood placed close to a fire. From that night on, Kai understood that the waterside behind the garden might follow him into any corridor, any room, any heart. Not because the waterside can walk, but because the person has learned how to sit when sitting. The water outside and inside meet noise and silence, meet memory and present meet. And between that meeting place, there is a fine crack, like a strand of hair, along the rim of an old bowl. Beautiful, not despite the crack, but because of the crack. Occasionally, new friends came to Kai's home, saw the cracked bowl, and asked. He poured water, handed it to them, told shortly about a town, a row of hibiscus, a waterside behind the garden, a woman sitting washing cloths, and a young man learning how to ring slowly. Everyone who listened also became quiet for a moment, as though they had just placed a hand on something that still kept warmth. Then each one left carrying a very small piece of the waterside in their pocket. Night. The city's voice had quieted. Kai opened the window. The wind was not strong, but just enough to push an edge of the curtain and gently ripple the surface of the terracotta pot. He dipped the cloth, wrung it, laid it on his hand. He did not tell anything any longer. He did not count any more when it was not needed. He simply sat, eyes closed, like a leaf folded after having taken its fill of dew. In that silence, he heard the water pass across his arm, through his chest, down toward the lower belly, and stop as water stops at a bank. There, a sleep came, not taking anything away, only laying down. And when the sleep laid down, everything in the day laid down with it, even the whistling that once scratched through several seasons. Now it was only a single thread hanging in a corner. Kai exhaled. The cloth grew cool. But somewhere, a waterside was silently preserving the warmth enough so that in the morning, when one opens their eyes, one can pour into the cracked bowl a little light and drink a sip of peace. The story, the seed sower on the rooftop. Morning in the city began with familiar sounds, the hum of motorbikes, the call of the bread seller, the iron shutters opening as though on autopilot. But on the rooftop of an old apartment block with rust-stained railings and chunks of plaster peeling from the walls, an old man bent over little pots of soil. His name was Fuwak. Nobody knew exactly which floor he lived on. All anybody noticed was that each morning he appeared on the roof carrying an old watering can, a bag of seeds, and a few bamboo stalks cracked by years. He sowed seeds as though writing a letter to someone without a return address. On the rooftop, the early sun was still damp. The dew clung to each vibrant leaf. Mr. Fuwak pressed each seed gently into the soil with his fingertip, quietly murmuring phrases no one heard clearly. From the floor below, a young teacher named Anne sometimes opened her window and saw him, then smiled softly. She often called him the seed sower on the roof because to her, he did more than grow vegetables. He grew patience, too. One morning, as Anne went up to hang laundry, she saw him sitting quietly, holding a half-split seed in his hands. He said, "Sometimes a seed gets tired. You know, it no longer wants to sprout. But if you leave it be, the earth will remember and cover it She did not fully understand his meaning, but she remembered how he said the word remember as though the earth had a heart. From that day on, every morning, she brought up a small pot of tea. The two of them sat together, watching the city wake up. He told her that when he was young, he had been a carpenter, building rooftops like this one, and he had once loved a flower seller in the old market. When the war came, he left the city, wandered on, and when he returned, the flower seller had married and moved across the river. "I only brought a bag of seeds," he said. "Back then, I thought I could plant anywhere as long as there was soil. Somehow, now, I am planting on a rooftop." Every day, he sowed a few seeds, watered a few drops of water, and waited. Some days, the rain came heavy, washed away all the soil. He sat collecting every remaining seed, laid them on his weathered palm to dry, and asked, "Teacher, why aren't you resting?" "It is raining," he replied. "Rain is when the soil is most thirsty to touch the sower. If you abandon it, the seed will think it is forgotten." His words sent a chill down Anne's spine that somehow felt warm too. Perhaps she had never seen small things handled with such perseverance. On sunny days, they built a makeshift cover for the little pots. Mr. Fuok taught her how to measure the direction of the wind, how to tell which soil held enough moisture, how to listen to leaves shift in the night. "Leaves also talk," he said. "It's just people are too busy to hear." Anne asked, "And what about seeds? Do they talk?" He laughed. "Of course, but seeds speak in silence. They tell you, 'I am not ready yet. Do not push me to grow.'" She laughed. He laughed. Their laughter drifted in the sun, light as a cloud passing above the rooftop. The rainy season arrived, and he began to grow weak. Each morning, Anne still climbed up, but he said fewer words, his eyes staring far off at the high-rise buildings sprouting around them. Back then, everywhere you looked, you saw soil. Now, you only see concrete, he said. But it is okay. I have found my soil. He pointed at the little vegetable pots. Here, the seed still has a place to wait. One day, the rain drizzled all night. In the morning, Anne went up to the rooftop and found him leaning against the wall, his raincoat loosely draped. Beside him lay the open bag of seeds, a few wet seeds scattered on the tiled floor. He did not speak anymore. His hand still held a small handful of soil. She trembled as she touched it and realized he had gone. But in his palm, she found one seed that had just split in two, the outer shell, wet and soft, the tiny green sprout peeking out. and planted that seed in the largest pot. Every morning, she watered it gently, as though afraid to hurt the sprout. A week, 2 weeks passed. Then one morning, the sprout emerged, thin as a hair, yet standing upright. She placed beside it a small handwritten sign, resting place of the seed sower. Time passed. Season followed season. The plant grew, then bloomed, then dropped new seeds into the old soil. Each time she watched the rain wash over the roof. Anne recalled his words. Rain is when the soil is most thirsty to touch the sower. And she understood that some seeds are not born to bear fruit, but to teach you how to wait. A year later, the apartment block was demolished to build a new condominium. When they cleared the rooftop, she asked to take the pot along. She placed it on the balcony of her new apartment. There was no more dew, no moss, only the yellow city lights at night. Yet the plant still lived. Every morning, as she watered it, she looked down at the rushing crowd and quietly thought, maybe each of them is sowing a seed of hope, of forgiveness, of a fresh start. Nobody knows when the seed will sprout, but as long as a hand is willing to place it in the soil, the earth will remember. One evening, a strong wind blew. The plant bent sharply to one side. Anne ran to the balcony and held the pot. She suddenly saw a small crack in the soil. In that crack, another seed was sprouting. She bent and placed her hand on the ground and whispered, "Grandpa, your seed still remembers." And in that moment, she felt someone sitting somewhere on the rooftop of the world, patiently watching her as he once watched the first green sprouts. She was no longer afraid of losing the plant. She just watered it slowly, just enough to hear the sound of water soaking into the soil. In that sound, there was the rain of the old man's hand, the seed sower, who never stopped. From that time on, whenever the city got too loud, whenever work swept her away like a gust of wind, and would bring the pot to the balcony, place her hand on the soil, and remember that wherever there is a seed, there is someone waiting. Some waiting needs no outcome, only gentleness in the wait. And every time the wind blows, the plant shakes softly, like an unspoken reply, "I am still here." When Anne grew old, she told the neighborhood children the story of the seed sower on the rooftop. The children did not fully understand. They just laughed and asked, "Can seeds hear people talk?" She laughed and replied, "Yes, they can, as long as you speak to them in silence." And then, one morning, when the sun had just touched the leaves, she saw another sprout in the pot. No one had planted it. She looked at it, her heart light as early morning soil. She knew there are people who leave, but the seeds they sow will tell the rest of the story they never got to finish. The story. The night's mending shop. The city at night looked like a large piece of fabric just flipped to its wrong side. The seams of the day showed along the curb in the places where the tired signs had just turned off, at the windows still lit like a few stitches not yet finished. In a small alley behind the old market, there was a narrow room with a wooden door faded by time. On the door hung a handcrafted wooden sign, Night's Mending Shop. Below it, in smaller letters, mend whatever has torn, put down whatever is heavy. The shop's owner was a thin woman with her hair simply tied at the back, her eyes clear like rain-washed water. The people in the alley called her Aunt Lan. She did not hang a clock in the shop. She said at night, you do not need a clock, because the people who come to her are not there to make time, but rather to catch up with themselves. The shop had only a long table, an old desk lamp, a foot pedal, sewing machine, and a tin box holding threads with needles. The colors of thread were more numerous than the days in a rainy season. Thread light, green, like a leaf thread, sky blue, like the early morning thread, yellow, like the light in a hospital corridor, thread red, like a word left unspoken, thread white, like a breath just laid down. Aunt Lan opened the shop when the last cry of the market had ended, when the smell of cooking fires in the alley still lingered like a touch. Every evening, she placed the kettle on a little stove, cracked the door open a little. Oddly, the door was rarely closed, but enough wind slipped in. Odd, too, that the visitors never knocked. They stepped in as if into a room that once belonged to them. That night, the first customer was a middle-aged man. His shirt was buttoned up at the collar, but the cuffs were frayed. He brought a jacket to Aunt Lan, saying he wanted the seam at the shoulder restitched. She touched the fabric's edge, looked up at him, then placed the jacket on the table. She did not ask him what he did for a living, did not ask why he still stood here at this hour. She simply poured him a cup of warm water, invited him to sit, then opened a drawer, chose a spool of dark charcoal-colored thread. She threaded the needle, passed the thread through, made her first stitch into the fabric. Her motion was slow and steady, like footsteps of someone who knows the way home. The man watched those hands and felt a knot in his chest loosen by half a turn. He told himself it was just a jacket, nothing more. But when Aunt Lan stitched the fifth stitch, He heard clearly the slow crack of an afternoon. He had missed dinner with his wife and children, the crack becoming a barely visible fissure. He placed his hand on the warm cup, asked her to sew it well, because this jacket had carried him through many seasons of wind. Aunt Lan nodded. She said, "A jacket remains a jacket. A person remains a person, but sewing a jacket will remind a person to sew something inside themselves." When he left, she wrapped the jacket in newspaper, tied it with a thin string, placed it in his hand like a packet of sunlight. He lingered outside the door, heard the sewing machine still beating inside the shop, then walked away. His shadow stretched past the pool of light like a new thread just spanned across an old hole. The next customer was a young woman. Her face was hollow, but her eyes shone determinedly. She brought a canvas bag whose bottom was torn. She said it had been torn a long time. She had taped it many times, but it kept coming undone. Aunt Lan turned the bag over, looked at the old tape, strips, dust-clouded and frayed. She said, "Tape is how someone in a hurry tries to heal a tear. It hides it, but does not sew it." The young woman sat silent like a leaf that has stopped trembling. She told a brief story that she had just escaped a 7-year relationship that she tried to prop up, something that had grown soft, taped, more tied. More string reassured herself that as long as it had not torn wide open, she would be fine. Aunt Lan said nothing comforting. She chose earth-colored thread because the bag's bottom was the part that bears all the roots of the road. With each stitch down, she exhaled quietly. With each stitch up, she inhaled a little deeper. The young woman watched, started to follow, breathing in rhythm with the needle like someone following a drumbeat. When Aunt Lan cut the thread and tied the knot, the young woman bowed her head. "Thank you." Aunt Lan asked, "Are you putting anything extra into the bag tonight?" The young woman thought, then answered, "I am putting in a little piece of paper with a few short words, so when my hand slips in, I will not only find what I feared losing, but also touch a phrase I want to keep." Aunt Lan smiled, handed her a blank sheet and an old pen. The young woman wrote, folded it, tucked it into the bag. As she passed the threshold, Aunt Lan said after her, "Now the bag is mended, so do not use it to carry stones." She turned and smiled faintly, said, "I will carry tomorrow's dawn." The city after midnight is often less hurried, but at the shop, midnight is another slower passage. Aunt Lan turned off most lights, left only the desk lamp. The old yellow glow cast kindly upon the fabric. She returned to the table, opened the tin box, arranged the spools, just so. Each spool returned to its slot, like someone returning to their chair at home after a journey. She washed the stainless thimble, placed it on a piece of tissue, wiped the scissors, set the tape measure coiled softly like the wrist of a sleeping child. Some nights are quiet, some nights murmur, some nights are like a cotton cloth smoothened by monsoon wind. Other nights are like coarse canvas, roughened by the sound of rain against the roof tiles. The rain this time did not roar, just lingered. The shop's door was ajar. Wind carried in a pleasant dampness. Aunt Lan was about to trim the lamp wick when a boy stepped in. He hesitated, like his shoes had soaked. He held a teddy bear with a torn ear, its fur stained. Aunt Lan set the scissors down, asked, "Are you cold?" The boy shook his head, offered the bear to her. He whispered, "His name is Rain. Rain hears the rain and feels sad because Rain's ear is torn. I want to sew the ear so Rain will stop hearing sad rain." Aunt Lan smiled and said, "Rain, sit still. I will borrow your ear for a moment." She selected a light gray thread, soft. She sewed in hidden stitches so the ear fused and the seam was unseen. The boy stood near the table, did not blink. When she finished, she stroked the ear like stroking a child's head. The boy hugged Rain tight. He asked, "Why do you sew so gently?" Aunt Lan replied, "In places that once hurt. If we touch roughly, it will remember the pain more than it remembers the healing." The boy nodded as though he had learned a wordless song. His mother had stood outside the door, silent until now, and stepped in, placed a bag of cookies on the table, said, "Tomorrow night we shall go back home," and he insisted on sewing Rain in time. Aunt Lan nodded. When the two left, the rain lightened a little. Once, an old man came carrying a photograph. The photograph was old creased, showing a white traditional dress standing beside a riverside. The man said, "My daughter is marrying next week. I want to remake her mother's dress so that she can wear it in the small home ceremony." He took from a cloth bag the dress, placed it on the table. The fabric had yellowed at the collar and sleeves. Aunt Lan gazed at the dress like gazing at an old letter, asked the man how much of the original condition he wanted preserved. He said, "Whatever can remain, let it remain, because the person who wore it first is gone far away." Aunt Lan rubbed her hands, spread the fabric wide on the table, took a thin cloth and lined it underneath, then began stitching hidden seams. She did not sew to make the dress like new she sewed, so the dress remained the dress of those days. the old man sat across from her, watched her sew, and his hand trembled. Aunt Lan told him to count the stitches like reciting a familiar prayer, counting to still the hand. He counted. When she tapped the final stitch, the old man cried silently. He said, "Perhaps the one who left does not need this dress anymore, but the one who remains needs to see the dress pass through once more to lay down a worry." Aunt Lan nodded, tied the thread, made a small knot like a period. A while of stillness. Aunt Lan warmed the kettle again. She remembered that for many nights she hadn't written letters. She had the habit of writing letters in a hand-sewn notebook, not sending them to anyone, just to the night. Those letters were not long, each only a few lines. She wrote about the people who stopped at the shop. She did not write names. She wrote the thread colors they needed. Tonight, she wrote charcoal earth, rain gray, and a white thread. This white thread she reserved for sewing herself. Aunt Lan smiled when she wrote that line. She too was torn frayed, also needed sewing back together. The shop opens for others, but each stitch into the fabric is a stitch into oneself. After over an hour, the shop had another customer, a large kitchen helper. Her hand still holding the smell of cooking oil, brought in a crumpled tablecloth spattered with old sauce stains. She grinned broadly, said, "Do not mock it. That cloth is used at our wedding, feast at the memorial feast, at the year-end feast. It means something when it is torn." Aunt Lan looked closely at the stains. Not every mark could be washed out. She pointed at one spot and said, "This is an old fish sauce. Mark, keep it." She pointed at another and said, "This is a curry stain hot." The woman exclaimed, as though Aunt Lan had read the laughter and the tears embedded in the spots. Aunt Lan did not promise to clean it all. She said, "I will replace one edge, insert a new strip of fabric to the old edge." She did. While she sewed, the woman told stories of the kitchen, of the flames, of those nights she squatted on the kitchen floor because her legs went numb, looking at the ladle and chopsticks, thinking of quitting. Aunt Lan did not counsel her. She asked, "What dish do you remember most from childhood?" The woman said, "It was my grandmother's braised fish belly dish." Aunt Lan said, "This fabric strip will be the fish belly part for your cloth." The woman laughed out loud. She said, "What you say makes me hungry, but warms my heart." While the assistant cook was waiting outside the door, a young delivery rider stopped his motorbike and asked if the helmet strap could be stitched. The strap had broken at the attachment point. The older lady said it could be stitched, as long as he sat still and waited. He awkwardly said, "Oh my God, I just started delivering now, so I'm running late. Just let me sit a little bit." The lady said, "Sitting a little bit is still sitting." He smiled, took a glass of water, and drank a sip. He looked around, then suddenly went quiet. He said, "After being out all day, seeing many doors opening and closing, so many closed, so few open, yet there is still one door open, makes me feel like I still have somewhere to sit." The lady said nothing. She just stitched quickly with double stitches at the place where it easily breaks. She handed the helmet back and said, "When the strap breaks, stop driving. Do not tie it temporarily with a rubber band." He rubbed the back of his neck and said, "I know." He put on the helmet, bowed like a blade of grass in a gentle breeze, and then left. Near morning, the shop was quiet. The lady was clearing the table, putting the tin box lid on, turning off the desk lamp, leaving only a small light on the windowsill. She looked at the sewing machine, thought of her own 2 feet, and the rhythm of the pedal she knew by heart. Suddenly, footsteps crept outside the door. A pregnant woman appeared. Her face was flushed in the way someone sleepless for a long time might be. She handed the lady a thin nightgown and asked for a stitch at a tear near her belly. The lady touched her hand and immediately gentled. The lady understood that was not just a broken seam of a garment. The woman said, "I'm scared of the night. When I close my eyes, I see things I don't want to. I just hear my baby's breathing and cannot bring myself to touch." The lady asked her to sit. She said, "Place your hand on the table. I will stitch very slowly. You listen to the needle going down and up like hearing waves. Each stitch down, you exhale. Each stitch up, you inhale. When I finish around the seam, you close your eyes. Tell me what you see." She followed. At the final stitch, the woman said, "I see a small, sandy shore. There is a black wooden post. The post is leaning on. The post, a string is tied. The string's end is thrown into the water. I do not know what that is." The lady asked, "Are you afraid?" She shook her head. "I feel at peace." The lady smiled. "That is where they tie the boat. You tie a string to the night, so the night does not sweep you away. You and the baby will know the way back in the morning." When she left, mist began collecting at the roof's edge. The crow somewhere cracked a single call. Then a few more answered. The lady folded the chairs, turned off the little lamp on the windowsill, closed up the shop. She poured herself a final cup of tea, stood in the dim light of the coming dawn. She remembered the breathing sounds, the pairs of hands, the night eyes. She thought patching the night is not about turning the night into day. Patching the night is placing new stitches on the old fabric so that someone can still walk through their darkness without stumbling on the worn part. As the new day touched the rooftop, she nodded off a little at the table. She dreamed she was sitting in the middle of a wide field of cloth around her, were the people who had come to the shop. Each held a spool of thread, walked along a narrow path. No one competed for color. Each carried a different breath. Some stitched shirts, some stitched scarves, some stitched a crack, not yet named. Above, a little kite, stitched from 2 scraps of fabric, flew high enough for the people below the field to still see. She was there, just taking her thimble and bringing the hands closer so that one thread finds another, so that the cloth from scraps becomes pairs, from separate becomes warm. She woke. The tea was cold. She heard brooms sweeping at the lane's beginning, footsteps going to work early, the spoon tapping the side of a cup at the newly opened coffee shop at the start of the street. She packed up, opened the cabinet, took out her old wool sweater. At the collar, there was a place that had come undone. She threaded the needle, chose a fine white thread. She stitched it for herself with the same stitch she used for others. She was not in a hurry. She exhaled when the needle went down, inhaled when it went up. When the stitching was finished, she did not smooth the sweater. She placed it on her palm, like placing a little bird just waking after a long night. She knew tonight and the nights to come, the shop's door would remain open. The people who misstepped with the cloth of their lives will still find their way to the threshold. And she would sit beside an old yellow lamp to stitch the broken parts into healed lines strong enough for a few more seasons of wind and of the night. Mending shop does not hang a sign of opening hours because it is located where time does not follow the clock's hand. The customers of the shop do not read a sign on the street, but read a stitch inviting inside themselves. They come, lay down a tear, take away a tie. On the way home, they do not necessarily become new people. They only need to know that at the place where they limped before, there is now a piece of the night that has been stitched by hand, by breath, by an unjudging glance. And with that piece, they continue on a little lighter, a little warmer, as if someone just draped a worn scarf around their shoulder that had just been mended just when it was needed. By noon, the sun high. Mrs. Lon locked the door, took a break. She went to buy a few new spools of thread at the market, picked up some small needles. She went home to eat a bowl of vegetable soup and took a short nap. In the afternoon, she sat arranging thread, choosing each color, placing them into the tin box in an order only she understood. At night, she lit the lamp, cracked open the door, placed a kettle on the stove. She waited. But she did not wait to fill the gap. She waited for the gap to have a gentle meaning. And when the first footsteps of the night touched the doorstep again, she knew another line of thread was about to be laid on the wide fabric of unfinished stories, so that when someone touches their chest late, they will feel there is already a healed spot, small though it is, but enough to breathe out a long breath. The story: the lamp lighter at the late night station. The little station sits at the end of a long street where the railway meets a grassy field, and the sky seems to lean down to hear the train whisper. During the day, it is like any other station. Passengers wait for the train. The sugarcane juice and sandwich seller leans against a column. The loudspeaker announces the next trip in a dry voice, then falls silent. But after 11 o'clock at night, when the last refreshment stall pulls down its iron shutter, when the cleaning lady's broom scrapes across the tile floor, in light strokes, the station transforms into a different place, sparsely populated, spacious, and lit by rows of oil lamps placed along the high windowsills. The man who lights those lamps is named Tin. He does not wear a railway uniform, nor does he carry a name tag. He lives in the small room behind the old ticket counter, where a calendar, with only its last page left hangs, and a long unused raincoat is draped. Few people in the town know when he arrived. Children call him Uncle Lamp. Adults respectfully call him Mr. Tin, and the late-night travelers remember him by a faint scent of oil and the warm light that electric lamps cannot provide. His job is simple. Every night he checks the wicks, pours oil, tests the flame, then places the lamps in fixed positions along the corridor platform benches and the path down to the station yard. He has a curious habit. Before lighting the first lamp, he stands in the middle of the hall, closes his eyes for a few seconds, breathes slowly and evenly. He says the light travels farther when the one who lights it is not in a hurry. Then he steps in. An old lighter clicks. A small blue flame flares, touches the wick, turns yellow, opens like a quiet flower. He shields his hand so the wind will not make the torch tremble, adjusts the knob, then leaves the lamp as one would leave a child newly asleep. With each lamp finished, he tilts his head slightly as if greeting. That night, the north to south train was delayed by 30 minutes. Only 3 people sat in the waiting hall. a man holding a bulky travel bag, a female student resting her head on her backpack, and an elderly woman clutching a small wooden box. The loudspeaker announced the delay in a flat voice, as if it were one of thousands of identical announcements. A night breeze drifted through the gap in the door, carrying the smell of damp earth and wild grass. Tin placed the last lamp on a step, looked through the glass window, and saw the dark sky thick, like a wool blanket draped over the field. He knew the night would be long, but he did not hurry. Long nights are often easier to breathe through if one does not force them to end quickly. The man with the bag paced in circles like a small wild animal trapped in an invisible cage. He stopped in front of the shuttered refreshment stall, peered in, then stepped away and sighed. Tin approached, handed him a cup of warm water, poured from the thermos he always carried. The man accepted, took a sip, found his throat, feeling more comfortable. "Where are you going at this hour?" Tin asked in a low voice. The man said he was taking his father's ashes back to his hometown. In his bag were some odds and ends, and the wooden box belonged to the elderly woman. They did not know each other, but they were traveling on the same late train and carrying something heavier than its actual weight. "You may put your bag down for a moment," Tin said. "No one will take it at a late-night station. Put it down, then you will know how tired your arm is." The man gave a faint smile, but indeed, he set the bag down. His hand, as though missing a habit, trembled slightly, then settled. The student opened her eyes when she heard the click of the second lighter. She looked at Tin curiously. "Sir, why still use oil lamps? Electric lighting is not lacking." Tin smiled. "Electric lamps light up quickly. Oil lamps light slowly. Late-night travelers need something that lights slowly." She raised her eyebrows, then laughed, saying his answer sounded like it came from a book. Tin nodded. "Books are lamps too. But sometimes we read too fast. The lamp in the book has not yet burned." The elderly woman, clutching the wooden box, sat near a paint-worn column. She gazed at the lamp as if looking at an old friend. The light revealed the wrinkles on her forehead, deep yet smooth, like dry creek beds left after water has flowed away. "It has been a long time since I saw lamps like this," she said, her voice tinged with a central region accent. "When I was young, my house lit oil lamps each evening. Smoke stained the thatched roof yellow, but the night was warm." Tin asked nothing about what was in the box. He offered her a small piece of cake and told her not to let her stomach stay empty this late. She took it, bit a piece, her teeth crunching the crumbs with a soft sound, like a thread being pulled through fabric. "Thank you, young man," she said. "Tonight, eating just something feels less tight." Tin simply nodded, sat down a little apart. From afar came the whistle of the train, long and thin, drawing the night closer together, like the two edges of fabric. But then it was silent again. The train still lay somewhere beyond the field, delayed for unknown reasons. The man looked at his watch, the student at her phone, the elderly woman at her lap. Tin stood, walked down the corridor, inspected each lamp, adjusted any wick that burned too fiercely or too weakly. "Lamps also have a breath," he told the student when she asked why the adjustments. "If the breath is too fast, the flame flares. Too shallow, it goes out. At just the right pace, it is still and bright." Around midnight, a boy selling lottery tickets drifted under the station canopy, his shirt wet with dew. He sat on the step, hugged his bundle of tickets to his chest like a small cat, afraid of the cold. Tin gave him a towel and told him to wipe his hair. The boy said, "I cannot sell tonight. Late-night passengers do not believe in luck. They believe in schedule more." Tin asked, "So do you believe?" The boy laughed. "I believe in the buyer." Then he grew tired, laid his head on his arm, slept lightly. Tin took a lamp and placed it closer to the step so that the golden light would lull the small face. Around 1 o'clock, the rain began tapping lightly on the metal roof over the station's side wing. It was not heavy, but steady, like someone tapping a rhythm to remind anyone still listening. The man stood up, walked near the edge of the awning, and tilted his head back to breathe in the scent of rain. The smell of rain mixed with the oil from the lamps and the old wood of the waiting benches, forming a strange but soothing scent. He turned back and looked at the box in the elderly woman's hands and suddenly asked, "Is someone in there going far?" She nodded. "Him," she replied briefly, and said no more. They did not ask each other much. At late-night stations, people do not seek details. They leave each sentence with enough emptiness for others to place their part inside. Tin went into the small room, brought out a teapot, and poured tea into 4 paper cups. He offered them to the 3 people and left 1 cup next to the lottery boy. "Drink something warm. It helps keep your body from curling up," he said. The student asked what he did before this. "I watched the kiln," he replied. "When I was young, I worked at a brick factory. The nights were the same, only the fire was inside a kiln, not inside a lamp. My eyes got used to big flames, so now I know how to talk to small ones." She asked, "What do flames say?" He answered, Do not push me. Do not abandon me. Set me right. A railroad crossing guard walked by his shoes, wet, and greeted Mr. Tin like a colleague. Tin returned the greeting and asked if the west track was still blocked. The man shook his head, said the pushcart had cleared the way the train would arrive, though he did not know when. They chuckled, the kind of laugh shared by those too familiar with things that never arrive on time. Tin turned back, pulled a thin wool scarf from the cabinet, and handed it to the elderly woman. Use this for now, he said. She shook her head, saying she was used to the cold, but still wrapped it around, because the warmth did not lie in the scarf, but in the gesture. The man with the bag sat down, stood up, set the bag down, picked it up again, like performing an exercise to resist time. The student opened her backpack, took out a notebook, and began to write. Tin glanced at her and asked if she was writing about the lamps or the train. She smiled and said she was writing about the man who lit the lamps, but doubted her teacher would like the essay, as it had no clear thesis. The rhythm is the thesis, Tin said. Sometimes you just need to hold the rhythm, and the words will find each other. The rain stopped. The wind shifted. Frogs croaked from a ditch behind the station, sounding very close. The lamps on the sills had burned halfway through the night, their wicks shorter, the oil lower. Tin calmly added oil to the lamps near the outer edge, where the wind was often more playful. He heard quiet footsteps and turned to see a young woman in a large coat and baseball cap, her eyes red. She asked if she could wait until morning. She had missed her train. Tin nodded, pointed to the long bench, and told her to sit. She did not carry much, just a small envelope in her jacket pocket, wrapped in clear tape. She sat, opened the envelope a few times, folded it back up, and finally sighed, whispering to the air, "I will deliver it in person." No one asked whom it was for. Everyone understood the night held many things that had to be delivered in person. Around 2 o'clock, the man with the bag fell asleep. His head leaned against the wall, mouth slightly open, like a door, waiting for someone to nudge. The elderly woman nodded off, still holding the box. The lottery boy slept deeply, breathing evenly. The student stayed awake, sketching the lamps with a pencil, the glowing dots reflecting warmly on the paper. The girl in the cap stared at the station ceiling, watching small cracks run like dry riverbeds. Amid that space, Tin sat silently, listening to every sound, breathing the night, the lamps, the stopped rain, the cold rails. He was not sleepy because he had learned how to rest while working. That was how he kept rhythm for the night. A stray cat passed by, stopped in the lamplight, licked its fur, then curled up, like a punctuation mark. Tin reached out. The cat was unafraid, sniffed his hand, and then half closed its eyes. He said to the student, "The night is like a long sentence. The cat is the period." She stifled a laugh, careful not to wake anyone. The train whistle grew closer. The red signal light at the end of the platform blinked like a heartbeat when the long-awaited thing finally approaches. The train pulled in slowly, steel wheels scraping the tracks in a long but gentle sound. The crew jumped down quickly, went through their procedures. The man woke up completely, stood up, grabbed his bag, and looked at the elderly woman. They did not know each other, but nodded, like two people meeting again in a shared dream. The girl with the envelope stood secured it in her inner pocket. The student closed her notebook, packed her pen slung on her backpack. The lottery boy stirred, dazed, as if just pulled from a dream. Tin stepped toward the platform, placed one more lamp near the train steps, the golden light wrapping the movement in warmth. As they passed him, he only said very short things. Travel safe. Set it down if it gets heavy. Do not forget to drink water. Let your heart know you've arrived when you reach your stop. The elderly woman paused, held his hand for a second, and said, "Thank you for the lamps." The man bowed deeper than necessary. The student looked at him and said, "Sir, I found my thesis. Lighting lamps is a way of teaching people how to breathe." He nodded, smiling with his eyes. The girl in the cap said nothing, but as she climbed the steps, she turned back, placed her hand on her chest like a silent farewell. The train pulled out of the station, its yellow cabin lights brushing across Tin's face like night moths. He stood still until the last car vanished behind the trees. The sound of the rails fading into a long, fine line of silence stretching eastward. He turned back and turned off most of the lamps, leaving two lit in the hall for the next ones who might miss a train. He cleared a few paper cups, folded the wool scarf, placed it back in the cabinet. The lottery boy was fully awake, rubbed his eyes, and asked what time it was. "Almost morning," Tin said. "Go sleep for 2 hours, then sell again." The boy nodded and ran off his small figure like a comma, chasing the end of a sentence that had just passed. Tin sat down, poured himself a warm cup of tea. He looked at the lamp on the sill, its wick now low, the smoke as thin as a strand of hair. He adjusted the knob. The flame shrank, then steadied. He thought of the faces that had just passed, the things they carried, a box, an envelope, a bag of clothes, a drawing of a lamp. He thought of what they left behind, a warm seat, a paper cup, a deeper breath than when they arrived, and a bit of calm that the night had managed to stitch into their coat. He knew he could not keep anyone and did not need to. His job was to keep the night from being cold, the path from being dark, the breathing from being rushed. Before dawn broke, he did one last round, turned off the lamps, poured the leftover oil into the canister, wiped the soot from the glass. For each finished task, he gave a small nod. He lit a short incense stick at the central pillar of the hall, a habit no one taught him. The incense smoke rose straight for a while, then disappeared into the open space above. Just like how stories dissolve into morning without leaving a trace. He pulled shut the heavy metal door, the creaking sound echoing gently through the empty hall. Outside, the first streak of daylight rose from the horizon, like a thread pulling back the edge of night. He locked the door and returned to his small room behind the counter. On the wall hung an old photograph, another station from years ago, where he used to light oil lamps before electric lights arrived. In the photo, a woman stood beneath the lamp, holding a bouquet of flowers. Now, no one in the picture remained. Only the light was captured by someone who knew to hold their breath at the right moment. He sat down in the chair and closed his eyes. Sleep came quickly, not because he was tired, but because he had placed each lamp in its proper place, and the night, too, in its proper place. In his dream, he saw a train with no number moving across a field, traveling very slowly so that its passengers could see the rice swaying and the water rippling. There were no loudspeakers on the train, only whispers of greetings and soft breathing, like a quiet little song. When he opened his eyes, the sun had already climbed a bit in the sky, and the sunlight perched on the edge of the table like a lost bird. He got up, folded his blanket, washed his face, put away the lighter, and jotted a few lines into a thin notebook. Night of the 27th. Light rain. Late train. 3 people carrying something heavy. 1 missed the ride. Lights enough. He closed the notebook and gave a small smile. Tonight, he would light the lamps again. People would come and people would go. Maybe they would be different faces, or maybe the same ones looping back in a new chapter of their lives. He would still trim the wicks, adjust the flame, offer a warm glass of water, and say a few short sentences. At a small station, there is a small job repeated every night, steady, like a heartbeat, like a quiet prayer that does not need a book. And in that job, all the scattered stories somehow find a thread that connects them, weaving into a fabric just thick enough for someone to sit down, lean back, close their eyes, and breathe. There might come a night when no one shows up. And that is fine. He would light fewer lamps, leave one by the door, one at the waiting bench, and one at the path down to the platform. That soft light would remain there, asking for no one to notice, demanding no one to come. It would simply be there. So if a foot happens to step into the darkness, it will catch a faint streak of gold and know that someone had thought of them even before they crossed the threshold. And if the night is longer than usual, that too is fine. Because a longer night simply means more space for the light to travel slowly and for people to return to the rhythm of their own breathing. Just like the way he always places the flame to the wick. Not pushing, not rushing, simply setting it just right. The story. The gardener on the misty mountain. Dawn on the mountaintop opened with a thick mist like a white cloth. The birds had not yet awakened. The wind had only passed through the tall grass stems and was not yet strong enough to ring the wind chimes in front of the porch. On that mountainside, among the old pine forest, there was a small garden, neither a flower garden nor a vegetable patch. People called it the Garden of Silence. A simple wooden gate, the paint faded. Inside, there were only a few gravel paths, mossy stones, and a small house hidden in the mist. The gardener was an old man named Hoa. He came here 20 years ago. No one knows where from. He spoke little, walked slowly, and planted nothing other than stillness. People said this garden had nothing worth seeing. One just saw mist and stone. But whoever sat there for a while stepped out with a changed face lighter, as if they had just left a sack of stones behind in their heart. Some said, when you sit long enough, the mist will partly disperse and reveal things not everyone sees. A dry old tree, still with sap. A small stream that never runs dry, and in the sound of the wind, you might hear a laugh and not know from where. Every morning, Mr. Hoa woke up before the sun rose. He boiled water, made tea, and walked a loop around the garden. In his hand, he held a small broom, sweeping the fallen leaves. With every step he took, the gravel under his feet whispered very softly, like someone reciting something familiar. He did not clear all the leaves. Only part he left, some fallen ones scattered. He said, "Leaves also have a way home. We should not block them all." One day, a lost visitor came to the garden. He was a photographer from the city who heard this mountain had beautiful mist scenery. When he arrived, he was disappointed. There was nothing but whiteness. He asked, "What is there to photograph here?" Mr. Hoa smiled, did not answer, simply poured tea, handed him a cup. The visitor took it, felt the tea was warm. He said, "What you cannot see may sometimes be the only thing worth looking at." The visitor laughed, thinking the old man was philosophizing like a monk. But after sitting for a while, he realized the mist began to thin, and in the distance, the pine trunks appeared tall and straight, green moss covering their bases. A small bird hopped over a low branch, leaving a very faint sound, like the touch of a breath. He raised his camera, then lowered it. "Perhaps humans cannot photograph stillness," he said. Mr. Hoa nodded, "But you can allow it to photograph you." In the afternoon, he asked to stay overnight. Mr. Hoa pointed to the small house. "There is a mat, there is a blanket, there is tea. There is no electricity." That night, the mist was thicker. The crickets chirped amid the chill. The visitor lay and listened to the wind sweep across the tiled roof. The feeling as if someone was walking in the garden light, even, and without pausing. He slept late, dreaming. He stood in the center of the garden. The mist parted, and in that gap, he saw his father, who had died long ago, sitting on a rock, smiling. In the morning, he told the dream. Mr. Hoa did not show surprise. He simply asked, "From where did you feel the wind blow?" The visitor said, "I am not sure, Mr." Hoa answered, "Then you have not yet reached the root." The visitor did not understand. On the third day, he planned to descend the mountain. Mr. Hoa saw him off at the gate, quietly said, "When you return to the city, if the mist in your chest clears, do not try to hold on. Let it fly away. It knows the way." The visitor nodded, bowed. Later, he told the story. He could not remember Mr. Hoa's face, only his voice, like a distant stream, quiet yet unforgettable. In autumn, the garden was quiet. Pine needles fell thickly. The mist rose later. Mr. Hoa still woke early, swept the path, made tea. One day, a young woman came carrying a small urn of ashes. She placed it in front of the gate, saying, "My father said, while alive, he liked this place. May I leave him here?" Mr. Hoa looked at her and nodded. He pointed to a flat stone near the base of a pine and said, "Place it there, but do not close the lid. Let the wind pass through. Let the person still breathe." She obeyed, tears falling onto the stone. He did not comfort her. He simply made more tea, placed it before her, and said, "The person has gone, but the warmth remains in the earth. When you feel cold, remember to put your hand on the ground." She did so, and was surprised to find her palm warming. Later, she wrote in a letter, "Your garden has no flowers, but I learned how to bloom without petals. In winter, a thin layer of snow covered the gravel. The pathway glowed under the moon. An old beggar climbed the mountain, asking to sleep overnight. Mr. Hoa cleared a place on the porch and laid a blanket. At night, the beggar said, "I have been many places. Everywhere people talk about stillness, but everywhere still it is noisy." Mr. Hoa replied, "Because people try to silence noise instead of listening to it." The beggar smiled softly. "Then what do you hear?" Mr. Hoa answered, "The sound of mist falling." The other was quiet for a while, then asked, "Mist has a sound?" He smiled. "Yes, if you sit long enough." That night, they said no more, only the sound of wind and the aroma of cold tea. In the morning, the beggar left, leaving a smooth, round stone behind. Mr. Hoa placed it on the porch step and said, "This stone can also hear." That year, a strong storm hit. The mountain road collapsed. Many trees fell. The villagers worried for him, planned to climb up to find him, but when the sky cleared, they saw the garden still intact. Only one bamboo pole was planted between the gate posts. From it hung a small wooden board carved with the line, "Rain is also how the sky waters the garden." Since then, villagers from the foot of the mountain occasionally came up, bringing cakes. Bringing tea sat with Mr. Hoa for a few hours. Everyone left carrying a feeling as if they had just drunk a glass of clear water. Some said in that garden, no one could ever speak loudly. Even if one tried, the voice would shrink by itself. Others said stepping into that place, one felt as though dreaming. Yet the dream was clearer than waking. One day, a boy about 10 years old came with his mother. He would not sit still, ran around. Mr. Hoa did not scold him, only said, "Try standing in the middle of the garden. Count from 1 to 10 and see." The boy did so. At number 7, he stopped. His mother asked why he did not continue counting. He said, "I heard someone counting with me." Mr. Hoa smiled. "That is the wind. The wind likes to count things that are not yet finished." The boy asked, "So does the wind ever finish counting?" He said, "When you stop asking." Old age came slowly, but surely. One morning, Mr. Hoa did not wake up. The kettle was still half full. The broom leaned against the wall. The tea had not been brewed. Villagers came up and found him sitting at the base of a pine tree, eyes closed, lips smiling. In front of him was an empty teacup and a small piece of paper that read, "Do not leave. The garden empty, for stillness does not live in me." it lives in the earth. They buried him beside the stone where the urn had been placed the year before. There was no gravestone, only a young bamboo branch planted in the soil and a cup of tea placed there each time the mist grew thick. Years later, the villagers still called that place the Garden of Silence. But now it had another name, the Garden of Hoa. Each season, someone would come to light incense. Someone would come just to sit. Sometimes, in the misty afternoon, people said they could hear the sound of a broom sweeping leaves, or the quiet pouring of tea into a pot. No one was certain, but everyone believed. Once the photographer from years ago returned. His hair had turned silver, and he brought with him his old camera. He found the same stone, sat down, opened the camera, and looked through the lens. The mist was thick. Nothing appeared clearly. He smiled and whispered, "You are taking my picture again, aren't you?" Then he pressed the shutter. In the photo afterward, there was only a pale white field, and in the center, a thin streak of light, like the breath of the earth. From that day, he titled the photo "The Breath of Silence" and hung it in the middle of his living room. Whenever someone asked, he would say, "This is the only picture I did not take with my eyes." And when people looked closely, deep within that white space, they could faintly make out the image of an old man smiling, holding a broom, standing in the misty garden where nothing was visible, yet everything was present. The story, the watcher of the waves, on the sand, evening in the seaside town, fell like a fine layer of salt. The scent of broken seaweed soaked into the sidewalk. The salty breeze slipped through the gaps in the rotting wooden shutters, and the yellow street lamps along the seawall were not lit to call anyone, but to remind the sea that someone on the shore was still awake. At the end of that street, beyond a row of small, corrugated metal roof houses, stood an old lookout hut facing the water. No one knew when it was built, only that every evening an elderly man with silver hair sat there holding a worn bamboo fishing rod, occasionally casting the line as though dropping a question into the deep. The neighborhood called him Mr. Lamb. Some said he had spent many years at sea, rowing his boat into the dark band of water at the horizon, then returned with graying hair and chose the sandy shore as his place for the rest of his life. Others said he never truly left the sea. He only changed how he stood upon it. The first day I met him, the sea was unnaturally calm. The surface was as smooth as glass. Only ripples stirred like whispers. I stood at the edge of the seawall, looked far out, and suddenly felt my chest widen, as though I had just lost some border. Mr. Lamb called me in a low voice. "Come sit here, so you feel less empty." I came, sat on the old wooden chair beside him. The sand beneath my feet was damp and cool, like the surface of a dream, freshly set down. He handed me an aluminum cup filled with lukewarm tea. I drank, tasted the bitter awakening my tongue, while my throat felt gentle. I came here because I could not sleep, I said, as though the sea forced people to speak honestly. Every night, it is like someone inside my head is tapping rhythm. He did not turn. He stared straight toward the horizon, where a faint light of a squid fishing boat glowed. The waves, he said. When the wind shifts, it taps. But to be precise, the wind does not change as fast as people think. It is only us who change, so we feel the wind different. I laughed, telling him he spoke like someone reading ancient texts. He shrugged. The sea teaches no books needed. Then he asked me to close my eyes, to listen. Not the sound of waves breaking on the shore. Everyone hears that. Listen to what lies behind that sound of waves. At first, I only heard the soft, white noise like a background texture sprinkled over the air. After a moment within that sound, another rhythm emerged, a very small, slow beat, the sound of water draining through the sand's crevices. Then a deeper sound, seemingly from under the ground, like the breath of a large creature sleeping beneath the shore. I opened my eyes, surprised. He nodded quietly. Once you hear the draining sound, the breaking waves suddenly become quieter. That evening, he told me about his job. Each night, he went to the shore, walked along the sand, picked up the things the waves brought in, that humans carelessly left behind. Broken bottle, torn net, fishing line, small plastic fragments. He called that watching the waves. I asked why he said watching, since it looked like cleaning. He shook his head. The waves do not need us to clean them. The waves need someone to walk with them, so they remember what they are hitting. I remained silent. In the darkness, the bags of waste he tied neatly sat in a row, like punctuation marks on a long sentence. In the days after that, I began to go with him. We set off at dusk, when the sky above the water still glowed red, when neighborhood children had just finished their game of football on the sand. My hand gradually got used to the feeling of pulling a thin nylon line out of the sand without breaking it. One day, we met elderly walkers couples in love kite flyers. He always greeted them, did not speak, only nodded. Once, a drunk man passed by, tripped over a trash bag, cursed a few words, then staggered on. He stayed quiet, picked it up, tied it tighter. I asked him if he was not angry. If you are angry, the wind rises, he replied. And when the wind rises, the waves knock too hard, and people tonight lose sleep. I did not know how long I stayed in that town. The time of dusk and night by the sea wove together like two sides of the same cloth. I grew accustomed to the distant ship horn, the motorboat leaving the harbor, the weather forecast broadcast at 9 o'clock from the community loudspeaker. I also got used to the little anecdotes encountered on the way. An old lady brought out some baked sweet potatoes, saying for the sea workers. A boy on a bicycle stopped, gave us a large seashell, saying to hear the sound of home. Mr. Lamb held it to his ear, smiled. Home is many. One picks the one they choose. One evening, rain came. Gentle but persistent, like a thread tied tight to the sky. We still went to the shore. The sand was wet and soft. My footprints sank deeper than usual. I said, "On rainy nights, few come fewer trash too." He replied, "On rainy nights, the sea speaks quietly. You must go close to hear." We walked very near the water's edge, where the waves licked the shore like a shy pet avoiding dirt. Each time the waves receded, on the sand appeared a tiny network of little ghost crabs, like someone's hurried handwriting, scrawled then abandoned there. I wanted to ask him about the crabs, about their effort, about futility. Then I stopped, because those writings sounded too heavy for a thin layer of sand. We sat in the hut when the rain stopped. The distant corrugated roofs began dripping steadily. He poured tea. The steam rose, coiled into a small cloud, then faded. "Is every night like this?" I asked. He nodded. "Every night is different, but the work is the same. Is it boring?" He laughed. "When you sit in the right place, boredom is also a kind of peace." I drank, felt the warmth flow from my mouth, down my throat, then settle in my chest. The sound of the night waves grew thin, as though someone turned down the volume of an orchestra to preserve the solo of an unseen instrument. One day, the seaside town held a small festival. They set up a stage on the sand, colorful lights, loud music. Children ran, adults laughed. The loudspeaker's voice climbed into the sky. He still walked his round, collecting trash, but more slowly, and sometimes pausing longer than usual. I asked him if he felt annoyed. He shook his head. The sea likes noise, as long as it does not drag on too long. Noise is like wind. It comes and it goes. Late at night, when everyone had gone home, the sand beach looked like a battlefield of scraps of paper, straws, beer cans, deflated balloons. We worked until near dawn. When the last bag was tied, When the shoreline appeared again, like a blank sheet, he sat down and sighed, smiled. One windstorm done. Another time, a young woman approached, clutching a small box. She stopped in front of the hut, asked him if he could keep it for one night. He asked what it was. She said, "A watch that stopped running." He accepted, opened the box, lifted the watch the size of the palm of his hand. The glass face scratched. The minute hand stood between two numbers, as if someone was deciding. He placed it on the table next to the cup of tea and said, "Leave it here for the sea to hear." The next evening, she returned. He handed back the watch. The hand still did not move. But she looked at it for a long while and said, "It feels lighter." He nodded, "Because someone put it down." She embraced the box, bowed her head, and walked toward the houses whose lights were beginning to glow. Those little stories, past nights like silver fish gliding under the water, fleeting cold, but enough that the skin remembers a touch. I spoke less and less. I learned how to walk on sand without leaving too many marks. I learned how to watch waves hit without worrying about storms. I learned how to breathe with the suction rhythm, longer out than in, so the hammering in my head calmed. At times, I sat alone in the hut when Mr. Lamb was busy, and I felt I did not need anyone to speak to know I was in a story complete enough. One night, there was truly strong wind. The weather report flashing on the small TV at the cafe near the shore said Storm Category 9. People secured roofs, pulled boats high up. Mr. Lamb did not go to sea that night. He sat on the porch, watching the slanted rain streaks. I arrived, soaked, panting from running. He handed me a dry raincoat, told me to change, then sat. We listened to the wind howling over the doorframe, waves pounding the shore tiles, tapping each other. "We cannot hold it back," I said, voice mixing with the wind. He nodded. "Not hold, just sit." We sat no more words. Amid the roar, I heard a steady rhythm. The rhythm of the old wooden house, rocking like someone who has been through many storms, knows how to lean with the wind so they do not break. I understood further. Some nights, keeping watch over waves is not about collecting trash. It is about holding a seat, holding a place so the wind knows there is something that does not need to be knocked down. After the storm, the beach was filled with the debris of days before a lone shoe, a thin plank, salty ropes, dead fish. We worked all afternoon. The neighbors came out too. More hands, more voices, the scent of sweat mixed with salt. At the water's edge, A boy sat watching his family's boat, stranded, broken hull. Mr. Lamb went over, sat down, silent. After a while, the boy asked, "Sir, will the sea give something back tomorrow?" He looked far out, then said, "The sea gives waves. The rest we make." The boy nodded, stood up, walked toward the group, sawing, repairing, tying. The wind was tired. Waves returned to their old rhythm. The beach like a person just standing up after fever. I began to sleep. At first, it was patched sleep, like a net with holes. Then nights grew continuous, thick, like an old blanket dried in sun. I realized that when my eyes closed, the hammering in my head did not vanish entirely, but dropped a notch, like a boat engine turned off when it comes to shore, so as not to disturb the nearby fish. Once I dreamed, I stood on a seawall, watching waves, and each time the waves withdrew under the sand, appeared little letters things people had said to me that I did not hear when awake. In the dream, I picked up each word put into a bag, and in the morning, I woke with a lighter chest. One afternoon, Mr. Lamb did not go to the shore. The hut door was closed, the chair empty. I went to his house, a small house behind the windbreak trees, with windows facing the sea. He lay on bed, breathing slowly, one hand on his chest. "Tired?" he said. "Smile, not sick." I sat beside him. He told me to pour tea, a small cup. He looked at me, spoke very softly. "When I no longer go, you go. The sea does not need a person, but people need their shoreline." I held his hand, felt the veins, thin, like an old fishing net. "I am not good at keeping watch," I said. He shook his head. "Keeping watch is not about hugging. Keeping watch is knowing where to set down." He passed one morning, heavy with mist. I was on the shore, watched the sun flash a pink streak, then stop. The path along the seawall was crowded like any day, but voices were quieter. The neighbors held a simple ceremony. No trumpets or drums, just a few paper flowers, a bottle of liquor, a little salt scattered at the door. I stood back, looked at the hut, looked at the sand, and saw all the work we had done flow through my eyes like a silent film. I heard in the wind the line he said, "Set in the right place, then leaving is also right." After that, I stayed in the town for another season. I went to the shore each night, tied garbage bags as he tied. I greeted passers-by, nodded. The children called me Brother Lam for convenience. I did not correct them. Once I sat alone, very long, looked at the water, and understood that I could leave at any time without carrying the feeling of unfinished business. because this work has no finish. It is a rhythm, the rhythm linking waves and shore, the hammering in the mind, and the drain under the sand. On the day I left the town, I went to the shore earlier than usual. The sky held a long, thin cloud, like the eyelid of someone sleepy. I sat on the chair in the hut, poured myself a cup of tea. On the table where the stopwatch had sat, now lay a large seashell. I held it to my ear. The sound inside was not exactly the sea. It was the long hum of something deep and distant, both like wind and like a heartbeat. I placed the shell down, stood up, walked one more round along the shore. Fewer broken bottles, less plastic rope. Not because the sea was clean, because last night someone had walked ahead. When the ferry left the town's small port, I looked through the window and saw a golden streak of sunset sliding across the water. I pressed my forehead against the glass, closed my eyes, and listened. No more urgent tapping, only the draining sound, long and calm, like a story told, but its echo still in the room. I smiled, whispered a line down to the layers of sand where we once walked. I have placed it. Since then, whenever I cannot sleep, no matter which city I am in, I open the window and search for a small sound behind all the loud ones. In the sound of traffic, I look for the wind draining between the buildings. In the sound of people, I search the empty space that lies between two sentences. In the sound of myself, I seek the full stop at the end of the day, and when I find it, I set it down. Set the cup, set my hand, set an unsaid sentence, set my eyes. Because some things do not need to be resolved. They only need to be placed in the right place so the sea can pass through you, like it passes through a shoreline that does not resist. One day, I returned to the old town. The seawall was the same, the hut older. There was someone else sitting there, younger, holding a bamboo rod. I walked up, nodded. He looked at me, smiled, pushed an aluminum cup toward me. "Lukewarm tea," he said. We sat, didn't speak much. At the water's edge, a child was digging a hole. The sand fell in the base of the hole, flattened again. He smiled, dug on. The breeze light. The waves tapped very softly. I closed my eyes and saw in my heart a small shoreline where each night things will arrive. Things that depart will depart, and I just sit, listening for the draining sound so that a long day can stop without anyone telling it. And there, an unnamed wave watcher still walks. The sand picks up small pieces of the day, ties them, sets them down, smiles, then leaves before anyone can call. The story, the 3 breaths. Tea, cafe. A narrow alley nestled between two rows of old houses, its green stone slabs worn smooth by the footprints of many generations. Every season, the alley carries its own scent. Early summer, it is the warm scent of banyan leaves and pollen dust. Mid-autumn, it is the smell of old paper and the coal stove timidly coming to life. And on winter days, the smoke wraps around the hems of coats so that each breath seems to take on a color. At the bend of the alley, where the pavement gently slopes down like a comma arranged in a sentence, there is a small tea cafe. A low-hung wooden sign reads 4 brown characters, Tea Cafe, 3 breaths. The wooden door is propped open. Inside is a room, just fitting. Size, low ceiling. White walls, stained yellow. A board-made tea table, always warm from being used. And a simple bamboo shelf, hanging earthen clay teapots, each with a crack of its own, fine as a hairline. The proprietor is named Thu. Thu is no longer young, but not yet old, her hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck with a cloth cord, her eyes long and gentle as someone who has sat many times before a doorway on an afternoon deliberately stretched. Thu opens the cafe at the hours people commonly leave off, 10 o'clock in the morning, when the market has quieted 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when the sun sits down on the doorstep, and 8 o'clock in the evening, when other shops are lethargically closing. Thu does not hang a price list, and there is no menu. On the wall is only a small sheet of paper, hand-posted, "Come and sit, breathe 3 times, then order tea." First-time visitors often chuckle softly. Regulars follow habit, sit down on a wooden chair still scented by sunlight. Place their hand on the table. Inhale slowly. Exhale slowly. 3 times. Those 3 breaths open the door to things seldom seen directly. The day I met Thu, the rain had just stopped. On the tiled roof of the house across the way, the last droplets still hovered like tiny punctuation marks, unwilling to leave the sentence. I entered the cafe because of the curious name. Thu nodded, gestured for me to sit. There was no, "What will you have?" and no voice asking, "How many people?" Silence, just enough for the drops on the eaves to finish falling. I did as the little paper said. I inhaled, exhaled 3 times. The first breath entered with the hurried scent of the street. Outside. The second, I felt my throat grow less dry. The third, I began to hear a very thin sound under my sternum, the sound of something stopping. "What tea for someone new?" I asked, voice becoming small, as if the room itself had set the tone. Thu tilted her head, looked at my hand. The sleeping pillow tea. Thu said, so that when night comes, you do not need to rest your head on old stories. Thu took a teapot water and a thin paper tea package carrying faint letters. Every move of Thu was as though walking on a step she had memorized, pouring water, warming the waiting. The tea's aroma, when it first touched the air, resembled the sigh of someone who has just stopped running, fragrant, but not sweet, clean, but not cold. Thosuket poured the first cup for the clay, a habit of naming the earth actually pouring into the saucer to awaken the teapot. The second cup, Thu pushed toward me. As the tea met my tongue, I remembered an old stretch of road where the slope was mist-covered and the ring of someone's bicycle bell hung at the handlebar like a thin drop of light. Thu looked at me, didn't ask, but her eyes were like the question, "What is there?" I said, "Little." I said I had been sleepless lately, and in every conversation, I always wanted to reach the ending first. Thu nodded. The ending is not the back door. It is a stone step. Step there, sit down, then look back. I laughed, because the answer did not resemble how one sells a cup of tea. But the second cup lowered. My throat grew warmer. I heard that phrase not as advice, but as a step for me. Thu's cafe was not crowded in the sense of being cramped. At most, 4 or 5 people at a time, sitting in 4 corners, like musical notes that know how to hold silence. There was an older woman selling sticky rice at the head of the alley, who often dropped by after her selling hours, her hands always carrying the scent of glutinous rice. There was an older photographer, hair always stuck with a little dust, his eyes occasionally widening as if capturing a moment. There was a law student young woman wearing glasses, jotting notes in a black-covered notebook. And there was a motorcycle taxi driver who sat longest on the chair by the door legs, crossed in the figure of the number 5, sometimes dozing, his head leaning as if wanting to rest against a wall that was not there. They came not for the delicious tea, though Thu's tea was delicious in a gentle way, but for the 3 breaths before ordering. Thu had another little rule that few knew anyone who just stepped in and immediately talked a lot. Thu always placed in front of them a cup of warm water without tea. Water, Thu would say, so that the sentences you hold together will be less tangled. I once witnessed a young man come open his mouth with a long string of unfinished business, mixed grievances, and names tossed like pebbles. Thu listened, placed a cup of water. He drank, stopped. The warmth traveled down his throat, unlocking a small latch. After that cup of water, he changed tone. Told slowly, the spaces without words began to work. One afternoon, after the rain, the sun came out. The cafe had a strange guest. He was a man wearing a white dress shirt. His wrist exposed a pricey wristwatch, the kind of watch that tells a different kind of hour than time. He set his briefcase down, sat upright, his gaze flickering over the shelf of clay teapots like someone inspecting a machine. Thu brought warm water out. The man said immediately, "Give me the strongest tea. I only have 15 minutes." Thu smiled. "Here the strongest is the shortest 3 breaths." He chuckled. "I breathe all day long. Not enough." Thu did not answer. She only placed before him a wooden card marked with 3 round dots. He looked for a while, placed his hand on his chest, and for reasons unknown followed. After those 3 breaths, his phone rang. He startled, looked, then placed it face down. "Give me 5 more minutes," he said, his voice dropping a level. Thu poured a tea deeper in color than usual. The wood and earth scent occasionally rose like a common memory of humankind. He raised the cup, sipped a small mouthful. His shoulders dropped. He began to talk about his father, just passed away, about the old photograph of his father taken in front of a familiar cafe, about the things unsaid. The words, if only crept to the edge of his sentences, but could not enter, because the tea was fulfilling its task, holding the boundary. 3 breaths. Thu said, "Do not drag someone back to the past. They only put a chair there. Whoever needs it may sit." From that day, the man occasionally returned, no longer needing the strongest tea. He would come sit, lightly touch the wooden card, and look out the window, where a young bamboo plant that Thu had planted in a clay pot stood. He said, "This plant reminds me of a kind of time that does not need a watch." Thu replied, "The plant itself is enough for many to remember." The cafe had empty hours. Thu called them around mid-morning and before noon. At those times, the light hovered above the table like a thin slice of a late-ripened fruit. Thu often opened the back door, stepped out into the small yard, where a climbing vine curled like a story tied in a knot. In the corner of the yard, there was an earthen jar catching rainwater, the water surface as level as an old mirror. Thu topped up water into the jar, picked up a few fallen leaves, then turned in and wiped the table with a clean cloth. In every motion, there was nothing to show off but a discreet reverence toward the lifeless things, the cloth, the table, the pot, the cup. Thu said, "Utensils are friends sitting beside ourselves. If we do not care for them each time we touch them, we will feel a tiny thorn inside ourselves. One summer evening, the power went out. The entire alley fell into a darkness, not threatening, just a bit thicker. Thu lit a small oil lamp, the kind with a short wick and a round glass belly. The light traced along the wall, climbed up to the ceiling, then settled in the corner of the cupboard. The cafe's guests suddenly spoke more quietly, and silence settled between longer sentences. The motorcycle taxi driver told about his daughter, who had just passed the community college entrance. The older woman, selling sticky rice, told a story of a strange visitor leaving behind an embroidered handkerchief. The law student young woman quietly read a piece of writing she had composed for herself. The photographer suddenly took from his bag a black and white photo. A young woman standing before the door of a tea cafe, her face angled away. The photo missed her face, showing only her neck, shoulder, and hand placed on the table. Thu looked intently. Mother Thu said, "That was the first time I heard Thu speak of a relative." The story of Thu's mother opened like a drawer that had stayed closed for many seasons. Thu's mother used to run a refreshment stall at the end of the village, aluminium teapot, bamboo seats, a tray laid out drying lotus seeds. Her mother spoke little. She taught Thu not to sell drinks, but to sell the time spent sitting. Later, when the village became city, the stall disappeared into a string of glossy shops. Thu's mother grew old, and at the end of many long days, she would often say, "Sit first. You do not have to do anything yet. Sit first." Thu said her mother passed away one quiet morning. I poured the water. Mother touched the kettle, then said, "Have you done the third breath yet?" I nodded. Mother smiled. Thu hugged the photo, sat for a long time. The oil lamp did not flicker. It remained still, like a hand softly comforting, but not touching. After that night, I began to understand that the 3 breaths of the cafe are not a ritual of reassurance. It is a rhythm of counting that has passed through generations. It is a small bridge spanning a narrow gutter so that someone can cross from this side to the other without getting their feet wet. Many times, I observed a newcomer just pointing at the wooden card, frowning, saying, "This is bothersome." Thu smiled, nodded, said, "Today you may skip it. Next time, if you still find it bothersome, we talk." Some never returned. Some returned by chance in a scorching midday when their shadow shortened and a space in their chest lengthened. They sat breathed 3 times as though performing a simple addition, and set down a cup of tea as though placing a stone into the palm of their hand. The cafe also has stories of departures. One session, a young woman brought an unopened letter and placed it on the table, asking, Thu, should I open it here or take it home? Thu asked, what are you most afraid of in it? She replied, the ending words, I am not ready. Thu poured her a mid-level tea, the kind of tea Thu makes lighter and warmer than usual. Drink it all, then place the letter into this drawer under the table. Sit 10 more minutes. If, when you stand up, you still want to open it, you open it. If not, you will still know how to take it home without holding it. She did as told. 10 minutes passed like a long drop. She stood up, said goodbye, did not open. I thought the story ended there. A month later, she returned, placed a white envelope on the table and smiled. I wrote the letter in advance. Thu did not ask about the content. Thu only said, train the hand to write before the mouth reads. One day, a boy brought a small hourglass whose mouth was broken. The sand leaked out like minutes dropping. He said, I want to glue it back so time will not fall anymore. Thu shook her head. Time does not fall. It simply finds another place to lie. Thu took a small glass jar, caught the remaining sand, handed it to the boy. Pour it in here. Set it beside your bed. Each night, you shake a little for sand to fall. In the morning, you see how far it has fallen. That way, you see time. The boy did so. A few weeks later, he returned with the jar half empty. Excited, I fell asleep earlier. Thu smiled, pointed to another jar on the shelf, someone else's work from before. One autumn afternoon, the photographer brought a broken camera. Its shutter stuck. He placed it on the table, said, it will not take pictures anymore. Thu brought a cup of tea and placed it next to the camera, saying, let it smell the tea first. He laughed, but sat still. After a moment, he said, perhaps I do not need the camera to remember. Thu nodded. That is right. But sometimes the camera needs a person to forget. He took the camera home, did not repair it. A few months later, he hung 2 photographs. In the cafe, one was the older woman selling sticky rice, no face, just her hands. The other was the cafe door seen from the rain outside. No words, just a small frame of light. The 2 were placed side by side, like 2 sentences nearly touching. On the day before Lunar New Year, the cafe was busier than usual. The scent of grapefruit oranges and dong leaf entered the wood grain of the boards. Thu wrapped small bags of tea for her regulars. Morning tea, mid-level tea, pillow tea. Each bag tied with a differently colored thread. Whoever received it, opened it, and inhaled the scent, promised nothing beyond a way to pass each day. On the last night of the year, Thu did not close early. The cafe had people who chose to stay through the transition. The sticky rice vendor dozed on her chair. The motorcycle taxi driver leaned back against the door. The law student reread her old writing. The man in a dress shirt placed his phone face down into his pocket. At the right moment, no one counted down. They took 3 breaths, lifted their cups, and looked out the door where fireworks could not reach because the alley was too narrow. Only the lights in the windows across the street carried each other. Thu stood behind the counter, smiling softly, as though she heard the bloom of a flower in the dark. After the new year, Thu fell ill. The cafe closed for a few days. When it reopened, Thu was a little thinner, but her eyes were still warm. When customers asked, Thu said, "The body is another cafe." Often it closes for cleaning. From then on, Thu spoke less, but brewed tea more slowly. The intervals between cups grew longer. I worried, but then I understood. Someone who keeps the cafe quiet for a while knows how to hang the sign "closed for cleaning" in the heart without making anyone uneasy. One morning, Thu handed me the small, cracked teapot and said, "Keep it for me for a while." I brought it home, placed it on the windowsill. Every morning, I poured water, touched the crack, felt like touching a river that had gone through drought. I saw the cafe in my own home. Very small, a corner table, a cup, a wooden card I made myself with 3 dots. Before starting the day, I sat, breathed 3 times. When I went outside into the wind, those 3 breaths were like a button fastened cleanly without snag. On days when I must speak a lot, those 3 breaths were like 3 steps I walked down, so that my voice dropped a tone. Tho passed away on an evening when the rain was just beginning. The news came like the first drops hitting the roof. At the beginning of the alley, someone hung a white ribbon on the utility pole. The cafe door was half closed. Inside, everything was still in order. The clay teapots placed in the right spots. On the wall, there was a new sheet of paper. Thu's handwriting. Cafe, temporarily closed. 3 breaths still open. People who came, stood at the threshold, did not enter, just bowed their heads. Someone placed a branch of eucalyptus on the step. Someone placed a bag of tea. Someone placed a photograph of the cafe taken from the outside. I stood for a long time, then stepped in, sat in the usual seat, breathed 3 times. The 3rd breath lasted longer than usual. I closed my eyes and saw Thu standing by the back door, her hand on the clay jar, smiling very softly. No other words were needed. The cafe reopened a month later. The one who opened it was a young woman, I guessed a disciple of Thu Hair, tied like Thu's eyes, not yet marked by the fine lines of sunlight. She kept everything identical. She brewed tea as though she was relearning the lullaby the mother once sang. The wooden card with 3 dots was still in the same place. I entered, sat, breathed. She nodded. First cup, she poured for the earth. Second cup, she placed before me. I drank, smelled a slightly different aroma, but the base was the same, like a road whose leaves have changed, but the ground still holds the old scent. She said, "Miss Thu told me, when you brew tea, do not try to make people remember her. You only need to help them remember the chair inside themselves." Since then, I have carried this habit with me. In any city, in a strange hotel room, before a long-winded meeting, after a song that did not quite feel right, I search for a small ledge, the edge of a bed, a stair step, a plastic chair on a sidewalk. I place my phone face down, rest my hands on the table, and take 3 breaths. The first breath, I hear my own noise. The second, I listen to the room. The third, I sense the space between those 2 sounds. Then I call for tea, though it does not have to be tea. It could be a glass of water, a moment of silence, a smile, or a simple nod. And just like that, the day has a place to sit. One time, I returned to the little alley after a long season away. The sign was still the same. The wall paint had peeled a bit more, and the young bamboo had grown tall enough to brush against the roof. A girl was wiping down a table. I pushed the door open. The small bell chimed gently. She looked up and smiled. I sat down, breathed 3 times. When the cup of tea was placed before me, I did not reach for it right away. I looked at the still surface of the tea, saw a faint reflection of myself, not clear, but enough to recognize someone who no longer needed to know the ending first. I quietly said, "Thank you for keeping the tea house." She shook her head. "The tea house keeps itself. We are just here to sit." Outside in the alley, rain had started to fall again, very gently, like words on a page, wanting to stay just a little longer. On the wall, the old piece of paper still reminded, "Come in, sit down, take 3 breaths, then call for tea." No one knows how many people have read it, how many have followed it, how many stories have found their seat within those low 4 walls. But every night, when the street lights outside flicker on, people look in and see a wooden door frame glowing with a soft light, catch the scent of tea in the air, and if they stand still long enough, can faintly hear a kind of order being restored in just a few beats. The first breath for yourself, the second for the room, the third for whatever is passing through. I left the tea house and walked along the alley, lit by lanterns. Every doorway held a story. Every step held a pair of eyes. I suddenly remembered other places to sit: a quiet stream behind a garden, a late-night station where someone kept a light on a sandy shore, watched by someone guarding the waves, a misty garden watched over by someone unseen. They all seemed like different versions of the same lesson: put something down in the right place, sit for a while, then return. At the end of the alley, before turning the corner, I looked back and saw the wooden sign gently swaying in the breeze. 4 brown words whispered endlessly. 3 breaths. Tea house. I smiled, placed my hand over my heart, and took one more breath, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. And as I stepped out onto the bustling street, where noise returned like waves crashing into each other, I felt there was still a small chair beside me, just enough for me to sit down at any time, close my eyes, and begin again. 1, 2, 3. Thank you for staying until the end of tonight's journey. If right now you are sitting in a small room with only the warm glow of a lamp and the soft breath of the wind, take a minute for yourself. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and feel the warmth that is still there in your heart, where tonight's quiet stories have touched. Every story on this channel is not just for you to hear, but for you to pause, to slow down, and to remember that peace is not something to chase, but something to return to. No matter how loud life becomes, with just a single moment of stillness, we can still hear ourselves. If you feel these stories have helped soothe your heart, please click the subscribe button so that each night, when you need a place to breathe slowly, I can sit with you again to tell another story, soft like tea, warm like a hand, and deep like a peaceful breath. Wishing you a truly restful night. Let your mind rest and let sleep come lightly, like dew settling on the roof. And when you wake up tomorrow morning, I hope you still carry a little echo of peace, the kind that stayed with us all through the night. See you again in the next meditative story.